Wales. There will be some areas of cloud elsewhere and continued showers for the north of Scotland as well as parts of eastern England. But under clear skies, well, many places will see temperatures dip into the low double figures or even the high single figures. A more comfortable night for sleeping and a fresh start to Wednesday. Plenty of sunshine around first thing, especially for northern and western England, Wales, southern Scotland. Quite quickly the cloud will build and it will tend to fill in, so a rather cloudy afternoon, broken areas of cloud and a few showers. Many places avoiding them though, and 22 to 24 Celsius in the south, 18 to 21 in the north. So feeling pleasant with the lighter winds and where we do get some bright spells, but certainly no return of last week's heat on the horizon. Now into Thursday morning, early hours we'll see thicker cloud across some central parts of the UK. Areas of rain or showers here. Either side of that, some clear spells, but with a cloudier night on the whole, it's a milder night. Temperatures in some urban areas not dipping below 16 Celsius. Now the cloud and the showers across North Wales, North Midlands into northern England continues to march north during Thursday morning. Cloud builds elsewhere and further showers will bubble up in places, but there'll also be some sunshine coming through. And Friday sees further showers in the north and the west, likewise on Saturday, but at the same time it will turn warmer.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello there, and a very warm welcome to Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin all this week. And coming up today, plenty of fast-paced news as ever from 4 until 6. And in this next hour, the race for number 10 is hotting up and heating up. That television debate between the two leadership hopefuls, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, saw sparks fly last night. The two contenders to be our next Prime Minister did not hold back from personal attacks, despite being within, yes, the same party, remember.
Their mortgage rates are almost 50% higher than mortgage rates in this country because they're borrowing so much.
I'm sorry, this
Canada.
is scaremongering.
Canada actually
this is
has
Project Fear.
Liz, I remember the referendum campaign. I remember the referendum campaign, and there were only one of us who was on the side of Remain and Project Fear, and it was you, not me.
Well, the candidates went on to discuss Brexit, China and tax. We'll have more analysis coming up with the Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley as Truss and Sunak prepare to face off again in another debate tonight. Britain is facing another major walkout on our railways tomorrow as members of the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers strike once more in their dispute over pay and working conditions. Well, Liz Truss has announced plans to crack down on those unions. She says they're holding the UK to ransom. The Foreign Secretary hopes to implement a cooling-off period so that the unions won't be able to strike whenever they want to, within a certain time frame, that is. The former editor of the Sun newspaper, Kelvin Mackenzie, will have his say in why he thinks the country needs to stand up to union bosses. And in the debate this hour, we'll be asking, is this bruising leadership battle actually damaging the Tories' general election hopes? The Labour leader says the Conservative Party has absolutely lost the plot, reflecting on Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak taking lumps out of each other, as he said during last night's TV debate. Well, some Tory MPs are also concerned that voters are less than happy to back a divided party. And joining us here in the studio for the next 2 hours is author and journalist Ella Whelan to give her reaction to all the news of the day. Thanks for being with us. First, though, the latest news headlines with Bethany.
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon. It's just past 4 o'clock. I am Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. The two candidates to become the UK's next Prime Minister will face off again tonight following a heated first head-to-head debate. The pair traded blows over tax, with the Foreign Secretary saying Rishi Sunak would lead the country into recession. But the former Chancellor claimed there was nothing conservative about Miss Truss's approach.
Under my plans, we would start paying down the debt in 3 years' time. So I'm not putting it on the never. I would start paying it down in 3 years.
That's simply not right. You promised almost £40 billion of unfunded tax cuts, £40 billion more borrowing. That is the country's credit card. It's our children and grandchildren, everyone here's kids, who are going to have to pick up the tab for that.
Labour's Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, watched the debate. He says neither candidate showed the kind of leadership the country needs.
I think the debate we saw last night confirms that these are two political lightweights who supported, defended and enabled Boris Johnson to be the Prime Minister for the last 3.5 or so years. What we need is whoever wins to call a general election to give the British public the choice of a fresh start.
Archie Battersby's parents are vowing to continue their son's life support fight despite a legal ruling that treatment can stop. Appeal court judges say doctors at the Royal London Hospital can lawfully stop providing life-saving care. That could happen in less than 24 hours. The 12-year-old has not regained consciousness since suffering an accident at home in April. Yesterday, Archie's father was rushed to hospital with a suspected stroke or heart attack, but his family say he'll be released later today. Archie's mother, Holly, told GB News they'll appeal to a higher court.
I believe we've still got one more option, which obviously we've come this far. I'm not going to stop now.
What is that option?
There's a possibility, the United Nations or the European Court, I believe. So we're deciding today. Obviously, it's not something any parent wants to face. Again, I'm just going to give it all I can until I can't go no more.
Network Rail is advising people not to travel by train tomorrow unless absolutely necessary due to another day of strikes. More than 40,000 members of the RMT union and 14 train operators will walk out in a continuing dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. Network Rail says only 20% of services will run and some places will have no trains at all. To minimise disruption, it's published a special timetable showing many trains will start later and finish earlier. The government doesn't know whether the coronavirus traffic travel light system enforced on those arriving into the UK actually worked. That's the conclusion of the Public Accounts Committee, who say nearly £500 million was spent on the quarantine scheme. That caused huge confusion with 10 rule changes within a year. Arrivals from red list countries had to stay in a quarantine hotel for at least 10 days, but only 2% of those guests tested positive. MPs have accused the energy regulator Ofgem of being negligent. The Department for Business and Energy and Industrial Strategy says the government needs to change its out-of-date energy bill support for households. The Select Committee added that a massive insulation drive needs to be launched urgently, as it would permanently bring down bills. Well, energy expert Will Hodson told GB News there are things we can all do to cut our energy costs.
Britain has got the oldest housing stock in Europe, right? And we can take pride, I think, in having built houses that were made to last. But those houses are drafty. They leak energy. And if you can plug those leaks, you're going to save up to £600 from your bill. So the message of yesteryear was switch energy supplier to get the best price. I think the message going forward is look for energy efficiency so as to reduce your energy usage.
Increased drinking fuelled by the pandemic could lead to thousands of extra deaths over the next 20 years. A study by the University of Sheffield found that people who were drinking at risky levels before the pandemic increased their alcohol consumption when COVID hit. And Amazon is increasing the price of its Prime delivery and streaming service due to increased inflation and operating costs. The streaming service says the price will rise from £7.99 each month to £8.99 from the 15th of September. That's for new customers or on the customer's renewal date. It means the annual membership price will increase from £79 to £95. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, let's get back to Brazier.
Bethany, thanks very much indeed. You're with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin all this week. And this is GB News on TV, online and, of course, digital radio. Now, this battle for the keys to number 10 seems to be becoming increasingly acrimonious between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. Now, during a sometimes bitterly personal TV debate last night, the two Conservative leadership hopefuls clashed on economic policy, China and, yes, Brexit. At times, the debate became very heated, the candidates interrupting each other despite being in, yes, the same party and having served in the same government. Here's a flavour of some of the key talking points.
Under my plans, we would start paying down the debt in 3 years' time. So I'm not putting it on the never, never. I would start paying it down in 3 years.
That's simply not right. You promised almost £40 billion of unfunded tax cuts, £40 billion more borrowing. That is the country's credit card. It's our children and grandchildren. Everyone here is kids. We're going to have to pick up the tab for that.
Rishi, that is not true.
There's nothing Conservative about doing
Under my plans, we would start paying down the debt in 3 years' time. I don't believe this negative, declinist language.
It's your own economic advisor, Liz. It's not mine. It's your own advisor.
I have lots of economists that are backing my plans. Everybody thinks that putting up taxes at this moment is going to hurt the economy.
Do you know what mortgage rates are in the US at the moment? Do you want to use them as an example? Their mortgage rates are almost 50% higher than mortgage rates in this country because they're borrowing so much.
I'm sorry, this
Canada.
is scaremongering.
Canada actually
this is Project Fear.
Liz, I remember the referendum campaign. I remember the referendum campaign, and there were only one of us who was on the side of Remain and Project Fear, and it was you, not me.
Okay.
And you talk
maybe
about
I've
this.
learnt from that.
What we do need to do is acknowledge that China is a threat to our national security. It's a threat to our economic security. And that's why, as Chancellor, I was pleased that we could put forward something called the National Security and Investment Bill. We also need to stand up for our values. And, for example, when it came to Hong Kong, I was pleased to ensure that we put the funding in place to welcome to this country thousands of fleeing who wanted to leave.
Rishi, I challenged you on this in the debate last week. As recently as a month ago, you were pushing for closer trade relationships with China. This is not something you've advocated in government. I'm delighted that you've come round to my way of thinking.
Well, that was round one. Seconds out, round two. Yes, in just a few hours' time, Liz and Rishi facing each other again in a head-to-head interview, with Rishi Sunak still needing, it seems, to make up ground to win, if the polls are to believe. We'll start our analysis this afternoon by turning to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, you're going to be locked into a spin room, I gather, for tonight's debate. Explain that to us.
I certainly am. I've been to these spin rooms before, and this is the way in which the media sort of analyse race and are cajoled by the supporters of each of the candidates. We'll be locked into this spin room. The debate is being run by The Sun, so I'll be off at News UK HQ, and we'll be watching alongside other journalists, but also, crucially, the supporters of the candidates in this race. Now, the last one of these I went to was about a week or so ago, and really what happens is that the supporters of these candidates, senior MPs, the people that we see popping up on the media to say that their candidate is the best person for the job, they'll be sort of nipping in and speaking up during the debate and saying, oh, that was an amazing point, oh, they didn't do very well there. And then at the end, we'll get to interview all of these people and we'll no doubt see what they have to say on GB News after the debate is finished. And really, they'll be trying to put across the case as to why their candidate won. But what's really interesting about what happened last night, and no doubt we'll see again today, 2 polls now, YouGov and Opinion, showing that amongst Conservative supporters and Conservative members, Liz Truss beat Rishi Sunak.
Still doing that.
And that's unexpected, because Rishi Sunak seemed to be a better performer in these areas.
So do you think that the Sunak team will go for a different approach tonight? Because obviously there's been a reaction saying he was mansplaining, he was overly aggressive, some have said, that maybe he'll have to throttle back a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. Looking at the way that Rishi Sunak behaved in the debates last week, when he was seen to be the front-runner, he was a lot more reserved, and that's the sort of position that front-runners take in races like these. They don't want to get into the nitty-gritty, they don't want to get down and dirty so much. But when you're not seen as a front-runner, when you're behind, considerably behind if we're to believe the polls, then you need to get a bit more scrappy. Then you might want to take more risks, and that's certainly what we saw last night. However, it didn't seem to work for Rishi Sunak. He tried to get Liz Truss more flustered. He tried to interrupt her, and that seemed to make him seem more aggressive rather than her seem less assertive.
So it might have backfired a bit. Yeah, well, we'll watch and wait and see what approach is taken tonight. Tom, for the moment, thank you. But let's just reflect that Tory leadership candidate Liz Truss has been campaigning in Hampshire earlier today. She was asked how she felt about this increasingly bitter tone of the campaign.
Well, I feel that this is a contest that is incredibly important. It's about the future direction of Britain. It's about, do we want to be bold? Do we want to lead in the world? Do we want to attract the investment into towns and cities across the country? That's the positive case I'm putting across.
Yeah, and do you appreciate Nadine Dorries' support?
Look, I have a fantastic range of supporters from all parts of the Conservative Party. And what is true about all of them is they've worked with me in government. They know I'm somebody who does what I say I'll do. I don't break my promises and I get things done. And that is what Britain needs.
Was Rishi Sunak mansplaining?
Look, I'm not going to criticise the other candidate in this race. I'm putting forward a positive case about what we need to change in Britain to unleash the potential of people across this country. I want to support those who go out to work, the self-employed, those who run small businesses, those who get things done to drive our country forward. Those are the people I back.
Well, that was Liz Truss speaking a little earlier in Hampshire. Well, joining us now in the studio, Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley, who started his column this morning with the words, "and breathe," which I think gives an indication as to your reaction to what you saw. I mean, it was good telly, wasn't it?
It was very good telly, but I also thought it was a good debate, because the two of them were discussing something that we've not discussed for a long time in this country, which is the orthodoxy around tax. Rishi Sunak does represent a legitimate Conservative perspective, which is you've got to balance the books, and then later on, if you can afford to, cut taxes. Liz Truss represents an alternative, equally legitimate Conservative perspective that if you raise taxes the way that Sunak has done, you'll kill growth, you'll create a recession, and it's just going to let Labour in. So it was really interesting to see those
Yeah, he went very hard on this advice that she'd received, and he was saying, look, even your own economic experts says that's going to be 7% interest rates, and you know, Project Fear it may be, but that could be a reality.
His side argue that if you cut taxes inflationary, you leave more money out there, and inflation, the classic recipe, is too much money chasing too few goods. You're going to get some kind of inflation, and the bank is then going to respond to that by raising interest rates. And then, hey, we're back to the 80s. What she would say in replying what she said last night is there's no evidence that tax cuts are inflationary. That's ultimately a decision for the bank to make about what interest rates should be. But also the unspoken reality is that a lot of Conservatives on her side, but not necessarily her, but on her side, have been saying for a decade that interest rates are too low, and that although 7% would be eye-watering, interest rates have to eventually rise because Right now, it's unrealistic to have almost negative interest rates, and it's a very bad deal for
Yeah, and the bank has already said, I think, that perhaps most households could cope with 5% because they've got fixed-rate mortgages and so on. But, Ellie, you're still with us, having listened to the debate last night. You were stuck in a taxi rather than watching it. I mean, what away from the policy about personality? Much has been made of that today. And let's not forget, they're not just, looking for Tory votes as leader. They've got to be Prime Minister, and voters hate a divided party.
Well, I agree with Tim. I think that, I'm sad I missed the kind of grimacing.
Really?
And the Liz Truss's hand movements and that kind of thing, because that is what makes good telly. But I like a heated debate. I don't, actually, Alistair Stewart, GBNews presenter, wrote for Spike this week that he was sort of shouting at the telly, let it run on, when they really got to that moment where they were really viciously fighting over this question of tax and the economy. Because, that's where you get to the meat of what actually the two of them think. And it was all a bit fake at the end when they said, oh, yes, I'd work with you.
Of course we'll serve together,
Yeah, and you think, whether or not that's true, be real with people. Right. I think that actually resonates. On the other hand, of course, this isn't very good for the Conservative Party, which is that both of them sort of halt at the end of their sentences when they say, and this mess was, I have to clean up this mess. Oh, of course.
Oh, yeah, I was actually a member of that government. Yeah. What about tonight, Tim? Just reading what you said about Liz Truss. She looked as if she was holding a tea tray, an invisible tea tray. Perhaps better to put her in handcuffs. But, I mean, is there much to do about actually, showing yourself as a Prime Minister in waiting?
She actually is better. She was better last night than she was in previous nights. She wasn't raising her hand to ask a question like she was at the back of the
Please, miss.
It was brilliant. But I think the two styles of campaigns reflect their characters. Rishi Sunak is essentially running a general election campaign right now. He's trying to talk over the party to the public and say, I'm Captain Sensible, you can trust me. Liz Truss, who's a more ideological candidate, the favourite of the think tanks, she's actually speaking to the party. And I think that's what's going to win, because it's party members whose votes you're going for right now, not people who don't vote.
So given that, what has Rishi Sunak got to do to claw his way back then in these remaining weeks?
Well, one thing is he could let her speak. Last night he interrupted her too often. And of course, some people are saying it's mansplaining. It's not mansplaining, it's just rude. It made him look petulant. And some viewers after 10 minutes like me were thinking, he can't half chew your ear off. I'm not sure I'd want that as Prime Minister, let alone have to share a cabinet with him. So actually, I think Liz Truss's slightly geeky, wonky nature helped her in this debate because it gained her a lot of sympathy votes.
Right. So maybe give Rishi the tea tray instead. So Thank you for the moment, Tim, and we'll look forward to your reaction to tonight's debate as well, or as otherwise. Thank you very much for your time. Now, let's reflect tomorrow. We'll be seeing widespread disruption on Britain's railways. Yes, once again, as around 40,000 members of the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers walk out in that dispute over pay and working conditions. Now, Network Rail says only 20% of services expected to be running. Some places, no trains at all. So passengers being urged, don't travel unless essential. Bit difficult if you haven't got a train. But the Conservative leadership contender and Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has pledged to take a tough stance on the unions if she becomes Prime Minister. She's promised within her first 30 days in office to stop union leaders from holding the UK to ransom with militant action. Her plans include raising the threshold for going on strike to have at least the backing of 50% of union members. That's up from the current 40%. Then at least 4 weeks' notice of any industrial action, which is currently at 2 weeks. And she'll also be looking, she says, to introduce a cooling-off period so the unions can no longer strike as many times as they want within 6 months of a ballot. And she says she will ban members from receiving tax-free cash from the trade unions while they're out on strike, so-called strike pay. Well, Kelvin Mackenzie, former editor of The Sun, has been calling for a tougher stance on unions. Well, for many a year, Kelvin, and perhaps we should reflect that some are saying Liz Truss wants to be a Thatcher in waiting, and of course Margaret Thatcher really did take on those unions.
Yes, and very grateful I was to at Wapping, where if they were left to their devices, they would have smashed the entire plant up. They were Luddites, a shocking example of trade unions' unfettered power, and we're seeing quite a lot of it right now. The railway strike is an absolute disgrace. They're using ordinary people who commute like me, but much more much more than just me, and it's not about me, to smash their way through to a pay strike that they're not in, to a pay settlement that they're probably not entitled to. And when they are offered the opportunity to be entitled to more money, i.e. to cut back on some of the ridiculous ideas that they've got about old working practices, they refuse to do it. And the other thing they quote all the time is that they don't want anybody forced to be laid off. Actually, the management, who are supine as hell, have already agreed that they're not going to lay anybody off except by agreement. Personally, I wouldn't bother with that. I'd start firing people right now. You have got to take on these people at some stage. Our country is in a shocking state. You can't fly out of the country. You can't drive out of the country. You can't get your rubbish collected. You can't do anything right now. And it's because the, quotes, workforce, unquote, led by a collection of lefties who've waited probably 20-odd years to get their hands on the levers of power, now want to impose their thought processes on the nation. They don't give a stuff about us. Not a stuff.
Well, I mean, the rail workers would say that, you know, they've not really had a proper increase for 2 or 3 years. Passenger numbers, of course, been well down because of the COVID situation, and therefore the industry really has been hanging on by its fingernails. I mean, is there a case that perhaps to get the rails going again, we need to maybe give them a bit more to get the services back up to scratch?
I think that's looking the wrong way down the telescope, to be honest. The revenues have collapsed by 25 to 30%. So in most companies, you do one of two things. You'd either lay off 25% of the staff, or, i.e. fire them, or you cut their pay by 25%. The idea that we're saying, you know what, I feel so sorry for you. There's plenty of work out there for RMT workers who are deliberately standing in the way of change. There's buckets of work out there. There's 1.3 million jobs. There's less people looking for work than there are jobs. This is a great opportunity. You know, all it is that Lynch and co like appearing on the television and like being almost like Putin-like, and somebody should take them on. So I guarantee to you now that trust, not my vote, by the way, not my vote at all, trust runs away with this in a spectacular fashion.
But let's reflect, it's not just the rail workers. It could be teachers, doctors, nurses, other public service workers who were supported over the COVID pandemic. The government will be taking on a pretty formidable task if they're going to, you know, clash swords with them as well.
Well, I mean, the teachers, the junior teachers, the first 2-year teachers, just been offered a 9% pay hike. In my wider family, there is a teacher. She's absolutely delighted. In fact, she's astonished, right? Instead of that, the teachers are now saying we're going out, we're going to stay out until doomsday. The doctors and the nurses are in a different state. And honestly, there must be a major question mark now about how long the NHS being funded just simply through the taxpayers' tax system can survive. There comes a point when we're going to have to go over to the Irish system of some kind of paying doctors to go and see them, or paying for, I know it's shocking, and everybody will tell me that whoever suggests this is going to lose the election. We have not got the money to fund the NHS.
Right, OK, very quickly, you said you're not a fan of Liz Truss. Are you a Rishi man then?
I am, only because I think steady as she goes is the answer. The trouble is, this country has been now through Boris, America's been through Trump. Throughout the world, people with mad ideas are coming to power. And I think Truss is one of them. I agree with her on her industrial relations strategy, but the idea of cutting tax, you're right, when we're going to have to then, you know, have this money splashing around, which we haven't earned, and we had 400 billion pounds of it went in furlough. What on earth? Where are we ever going to fill the bucket back up?
Right, Kelvin, thank you very much indeed, as ever, and forthright. Thank you for that. Let's just reflect with Ellie in the studio about, I think he's pretty forthright on his industrial strategy there. But, I mean, sacking all the rail workers is not going to work, is it?
Kelvin Mackenzie sounds like a boss's brown nose. I mean, he clearly has no concept of what it is to be a working person who can't make ends meet, which is what, you know, people whinge about the RMT, that, you know, oh, they're on such great pay, or why do they want more? The reason why the RMT is such a successful union is because it doesn't do tokenistic action. It does continued strike action until it gets what it wants, until its workers get what it wants. And so, the fact that there's a further disruption later this week is only proof of the fact that they are determined to secure things like an end to forced redundancies, a pay rise. We know, they're blue.
So it's not just about the pay, it's about job security as well.
It's about job security. At the moment, if you have, moving away from someone ridiculous like Kelvin MacKenzie to someone who's vying to be the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, this government cannot claim to kind of cry crocodile tears and say that it's for working people and levelling up and all this nonsense. At the same time as instituting extreme attacks on workers' rights, on the ability of working people to make their voices heard and use their weight as working people to enact industrial action. This is just, it's not even out of Thatcher's playbook. It's out of some kind of parody of Thatcher to go this far in relation to this. We know that there's been moves already to bring in agency workers to help bosses to break strike action. You just have to, people might be annoyed by, and, of course, it's disruptive. But put yourself in the position of someone who has not had a pay increase, who cannot meet their energy bills, who cannot meet their food bills. What are you meant to do? OK, I think Kelvin is still there. Let's put that back to Kelvin. Kelvin, if they're not going to go on strike, what do they do?
Well, let's face what the problems that the rail workers are in, the railway companies are in. They've got 25 or 30% less revenues. What happens to the company itself? Does the taxpayer carry on funding it? Do I carry on funding the railway because the money's not there? No, I don't. I go to the railway workers and I say, you are going to have to cut your workforce. If you cut your workforce, we will give you a pay rise, but otherwise we face going bust. It's straightforward economics. I'm sure your colleague there probably is probably challenged in the economic area, but what would you do about 25% less revenue if that was coming into your house? The trouble is, find yourself another job.
Yeah, the trouble is, if you cut the staff, you're not going to have the trains to get the services back up. You're on a downward spiral then.
They're never coming back. The world has changed. Working from home, I am sitting currently in my house, right, doing this piece of television. Who could have said it was all going to happen like this 5-10 years ago? The world is spinning off industrially and work-wise is completely different. And the RMT is going to suffer in the same way as other industries suffer when change comes along. If we had most of the ideas I've heard this afternoon, to be honest with you, we'd all be shoeing our horses still.
Right. I'll just say NGA to you, National Graphical Association, and I'll let you calm down. Thank you very much. Thank you for that.
Well said, well remembered.
And very quickly, come back very quickly on that.
I think maybe Kelvin needs to get out of the house a bit more to realise that actually, not all of us are working from home after the pandemic. There are people, working class people, who make this country one, who get his food to him and get his post to him and wake up.
Thank you for that. With us for the rest of the afternoon, so plenty more on that score. You're with Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin all this week on GB News, on TV, online and digital radio. Coming up, the debate this hour, well, we've had one already, it seems. We'll be asking the bruising leadership battle, is it actually damaging the Tories' general election hopes? We'll also be reflecting on the life and legacy of Lord Trimble, the original First Minister of Northern Ireland, and remember, the co-architect of that Good Friday Agreement. He passed away yesterday at the age of 77 after a short illness. We'll be looking at his life with our Northern Ireland correspondent, Dougie Beattie. We'll be back in a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good evening. It's 32 minutes past 4. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. The two candidates to become the UK's next Prime Minister will face off again tonight, following a heated first head-to-head debate. The pair traded blows over tax, with the Foreign Secretary saying Rishi Sunak would lead the country into recession. But the former Chancellor claimed there was nothing Conservative about Miss Truss's approach.
Under my plans, we would start paying down the debt in 3 years' time. So I'm not putting it on the never. I would start paying it down in 3 years.
That's simply not right. You promised almost £40 billion of unfunded tax cuts, £40 billion more borrowing. That is the country's credit card. It's our children and grandchildren, everyone here's kids, who are going to have to pick up the tab for that.
People in England are being urged to use water wisely as the country faces drought in August. The Environment Agency is warning the dry conditions have been exacerbated by record high temperatures. Most of England has moved into prolonged dry weather status and is implementing precautionary measures to mitigate the impacts. Public concern over inflation has reached its highest level in 40 years. A poll by Ipsos found that 45% of adults think it's one of the most important issues facing the country today, as prices continue to rise. The data shows people aged 18 to 34 were most concerned. And Network Rail is advising people not to travel by train tomorrow unless absolutely necessary, due to another day of strikes. More than 40,000 members of the RMT union and 14 train operators will walk out, leaving just 20% of services running. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. We'll get back to Brazier now.
Bethany, thanks for that. You're with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin this week on Brazier, and you're watching and listening to GB News on TV, online and digital radio, of course. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on this Tory leadership contest. No surprise there. First of all, Nazim saying it seems so sad that Rishi Sunak is being accused of his private education when most of the Prime Ministers were privately educated. Yes, and went to Eton. Hopefully, if he becomes Prime Minister, he will invest in education and training, which is lacking in all fields. Paul says, I would like to say that when the Tories say they are going to cut taxes, the taxes are the highest they've been in 70 years, highest inflation in 40 years and rising, highest energy costs we've ever seen. Yes, everyone's hurting at the moment. John says, I thought Sunak was rude and intolerably offensive to Liz Truss. I got sick of hearing about his poor parents who struggled. If they give it to Sunak, the Tories will lose. That's his judgment. We'll keep your views coming, of course, and we'll reflect them throughout the afternoon. Now, the planned recall today of the Stormont Assembly in Northern Ireland has been postponed. It follows the death of Lord David Trimble, the original First Minister of Northern Ireland and indeed co-architect of the Good Friday Agreement. The Unionist leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner passed away yesterday at the age of 77. Let's speak now to GB News Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie, who's in Stormont for us. Dougie, with this postponement, is this a time where perhaps people can step back and reflect and maybe come across the political divide in honour of David Trimble?
You would like to think so, but David Trimble, as you've mentioned, was one of the architects of the Good Friday Agreement. He was a unionist leader that had a lot to give and a lot to lose, and he himself said that the Good Friday Agreement and the protocol could not live in the same space. Tony Blair, another architect of it, has said exactly the same thing, and there is no unionist support whatsoever for the protocol. And the way this was set up between John Hume, David Trimble, Tony Blair and Bill Clinton it was all based on consent. 25 years on, and it lies unable to function because the consent of both sides of the community are not here. David Trimble himself, of course, was the First Minister, and his first 4 years in power here were very bumpy along the way. Problems over IRA decommissioning and, of course, legacy issues. He was a very clever man. He was a law lecturer, and constitutionally he got most stuff right. His problem came in around the security stuff. That's where he agreed to prisoners being let out, letters of mercy and Queen's pardons coming every shape to IRA prisoners that left legacy in the state that it's in now. In fact, there wouldn't have been a member of the media closer to what was going on in Glengall Street at that time, Ulster Unionist headquarters, than myself. And I can tell you that some of the comments that were coming out then was that if they let legacy go ahead, that it would be used to rewrite history, and that it would be a virtual cash machine for a utopia for barristers and legal people inside Northern Ireland. And that's pretty much now exactly what has happened, and it would keep on bringing the institutions down. But we've got to remember that the years up to the Good Friday Agreement were very, very violent years. I lived through them. And for 25 years, we've had relative peace. And that is down to David Trimble, and it is down to John Hume. And, you know, they talk about statues and stuff being put into these gardens, and they are quite controversial. I mean, they weren't allowed to put a stone celebrating 100 years of Northern Ireland here. But I do think there should be something to remember those two men, and indeed Mo Molan, who pushed everything over the line for that 25 years. And Northern Ireland has become a different place since then. But the Unionist Party gave everything, and now from their majority in here, they hold about 9 seats.
Yeah, and of course the UUP destroyed effectively with the DUP coming off the back of that. But in your assessment, very quickly, I mean, how much peril is the Good Friday Agreement in?
It's on life support, quite literally on life support. And I have spoke to lots of the unionist community, and for once I can actually say they are very much telling their representatives, don't go back in. They're saying about cost of living crisis and all that. There's nothing that here can do about the cost of living crisis. Northern Ireland is given the same amount of money in a block grant and Barnett consequentials to divide up. So unless they take off one person to give somebody else, it's all going to still be in the same place.
Dougie at Stormont, thanks very much indeed for updating us there. Remembering the legacy, of course, of David Trimble. You're with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin this week. You're watching GB News and listening to us online on digital radio too. Coming up, the new report suggesting that public spending in the north of England has fallen below the national average. That's despite the government's flagship levelling up agenda. We'll be making a case as to why the cities outside London may not need so much help from Westminster and are quite capable of creating successful growth all on their own. And in the debate this hour, we'll be asking, is this bruising leadership battle actually damaging the Tories' general election hopes? And the Lionesses, well, they're due to take on Sweden in the Euro semi-finals tonight. Our reporter Ellie Costello in the fan zone in central London. All that to come. First, though, let's take a short break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Brazier, and you're with me, Mark Longher, sitting in for Colin all this week, and you're watching and listening to GB News on TV, online, and, of course, digital radio. Now, one of those moments when the country comes together. No, it's not the Tory party election debate, but tonight's game as England's Lionesses take on Sweden in the UEFA Women's Euro semi-final, the first semi-final. These national events can galvanise a country that's often decried at the moment as broken Britain. And think back to the 2012 Olympics and what that did for us. Well, the game being hosted tonight at Bramall Lane in Sheffield, a sellout, 32,000 people heading there to cheer on the team. And incidentally, perhaps spend a lot of money, giving a boost to the local economy and employment. The same tomorrow night then for Milton Keynes, yes. Remember, that's City 2 now for the second semi-final between Germany and France. And that other match, Sunak versus Truss, has seen a few fouls and two-footed tackles, but nothing in their gameplay to seemingly address the political fixture for the Tories levelling up. Both candidates declaring themselves in favour in last night's telly fixture, held in Stoke-on-Trent, let's remind you, but not much in detail about how they carry levelling up forward. But if cities like Sheffield, Milton Keynes and then Birmingham with the Commonwealth Games in a week or so, and Liverpool or Glasgow perhaps for Eurovision, if they can do the job on their own by attracting and then hosting major money-spinning events, why wait in vain for promised handouts and help for Westminster? Now, Birmingham, you remember, was hit badly by the decline and then disappearance of Britain's car industry, closely followed by a lot of manufacturing that supported it. But in the coming weeks, more than 1 million visitors are expected to visit the Midlands for the athletics. All of them, of course, spending on transport, accommodation, food and drink. Then let's shout for Glasgow. Yes, the 60s siren Lulu making very vocal her support for the Scottish city to host Eurovision next year. And not to be outdone, Cheryl Baker has added her voice by making her mind up, for Cardiff, welcoming the huge Songfest next year. Well, such an internationally acclaimed honour, albeit in place of Ukraine, of course, will do wonders for the regional economies of either Scotland or Wales. So who actually needs the politicians to bestow their favours to help these places level up when these great cities appear to be doing a better job on their own of attracting money, people and international recognition? And what better way to put the country back on its feet amid all the economic doom and gloom? All we need to do is make sure the trains are running. Oh dear. And we can actually get to the cities and that people have got a bit of money in their pockets to spend when they get there. Back of the net, anyone? Let's take Ella on board for that. Am I perhaps having a bit of wishful thinking? Or, should we really be talking Britain up a bit more and seeing that things are going on in these regional cities that, can boost local economies?
Yes, and you make a very good point that there are initiatives that are happening in individual cities which are, largely nothing to do with Westminster that are fairly independent and are being very successful. But I mean, you only have to look at there is a limit to which something like a kind of tourism attraction, which these things sort of function as, can take you. I mean, Cornwall is a perfect example of a part of the UK which has for decades had fierce tourism industry. But actually, the people living there are quite often in
the housing is boosted. They can't afford to live there, and of course, it's only 3 months that the money comes into the area.
Yeah, and employment in the off season is almost impossible. It's invisible. It doesn't exist, and there's no industry there to keep a place like that going. I think the thing about levelling up was the one thing that I think you sort of gesture to that was exciting about it was this idea that people who live in the areas that the money was promised to would make the kind of decisions necessary. So playing on and using the idea of local knowledge, of people who knew what industries worked in these areas, who knew the kind of what talent was there, what employment people wanted. I think building on that, you have to understand that the promise of levelling up was at least in part about boosting infrastructure, boosting R&D, new innovative technologies, all these kind of things.
Northern Powerhouse, do you remember that? What happened to that?
Yeah, I mean, all these...
Went down the rails with HS2, it
You're
seems.
right, they all end up being empty slogans, but I think that there has to be some kind of... And this is where perhaps both of the leadership hopefuls are getting things wrong in this debate with fixating on tinkering with tax, is that there has to be some kind of fundamental shift in the way in which the economy in this country works. I'm not the biggest fan of Keir Starmer, neither am I of either the Tory leadership hopefuls, but he had it at least right in his empty use of the phrase growth, growth, growth the other day, when he, he doesn't have the policy to back it up.
It's the only way we're going to get.
But that is the only way we're going to do anything.
Yeah, Ella, for the moment, thank you for that. Well, we've been debating lots of things so far this afternoon, but this is time for the debate this hour with the former Tory chairman yesterday warning the Conservative leadership candidates should not trash the brand of the party. Lord Maud of Horsham, Francis Maud as was, made his comments ahead of the leadership debate last night, saying people's impressions will be formed by how they behave in this leadership election. Today, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer claimed the Conservative Party has absolutely lost the plot, reflecting on the two Tory leadership candidates taking lumps out of each other, as he said. So, we're asking, is the leadership battle damaging the Tories' general election hopes? We're joined by our political commentator Benedict Spence and author and broadcaster Amy Nicol. Thank you both for joining us. First, Benedict, your sort of take on what you saw on telly last night.
I mean, it was a bit... In terms of actual substance, I thought it was rather mundane. I thought it was a bit petty. I thought it showed two candidates who weren't especially assured of their position, frankly. The fact that Liz Truss wasn't able to be very assertive, and indeed the fact that Rishi Sunak tried a little too hard to be assertive. I think, really, if I'm going to be completely honest, I don't actually think that the general public have the highest standards or expectations for either of these two individuals. And actually, I don't buy so much into the idea that all of this sniping is massively damaging the Tory brand. And if it is, then the Tory party should have thought long and hard about having a leadership contest at this moment, because this is what happens during just about every leadership contest or election in history. People start to get nasty, especially when they have a dearth of ideas and all they're left with is the opposition to go after, and they have to play the man, not the ball. But I do think actually we slightly overplay the idea that this is irreparably damaging the Tory brand. The Tory party was labelled the nasty party, and it's still managed to keep winning elections despite that. I think actually what's far more damaging to the Tory brand is the fact that, as I just said, there is a dearth of ideas, long-term planning, and actually I think that a lot of people will look at the current state of the country, the current malaise, and lay that squarely at the door of both of these individuals who, let's remember, both quite senior, not just in Boris Johnson's administration, but in Liz Truss's case, in the previous one as well.
Yeah. Amy, what do you make of the approach? Because the critics say, they're trying to throw red meat to the Tory party faithful and the party voters while ignoring what's needed to get the country back on board.
I think that's absolutely spot on, actually. I think when Boris Johnson finally resigned, I think a lot of us were quite celebratory. And then what we saw was the Conservative Party somehow appear to become electable again in the form of Penny Mordaunt and Tom Tugendhat, who suddenly started kind of capturing the attention of those even floating votes, certainly, and even some of the people typically on the left. But then, what do we see them do then? Shoot themselves completely in the foot and put forward two people which I heard described recently as choosing between either being punched in the face or kicked in the proverbials. And I really think that's what the Conservative membership have offered us up. And I think when Penny and Tom were eliminated from the running, the Conservatives lost themselves the next general election for sure. And there are stats up. So a recent study today showed that both the candidates left are minus 30 in popularity with the general population. So, you know, while Liz Truss is the darling of the Tory party at the moment, she's not making her message there's no mainstream appeal. The thought of Liz Truss being Prime Minister to most people outside the Conservative Party is hilarious. And imagining her on the world stage is embarrassing. And that's just the truth.
Yeah, I mean, some unkind comments that she's Thatcher Light or even the tin foil lady rather than the Iron Lady. But Benedict, what about this point, though, that it was Rishi Sunak who was polling as the best potential Prime Minister, and then suddenly that's reversed, and with the Tory party polls that have taken place, he's way behind still Liz Truss.
I mean, this is the difficulty, is that you've got in a position where you had a number of candidates, as has just been pointed out, potentially Tom Tugendhat, perhaps Penny Mordaunt. Kemi Badenoch also polled very well amongst members, but didn't do particularly well amongst the MPs themselves. So the MPs clearly have a set of preferences to who they want. That's these two candidates, both of which are now jostling to see who can be the more like Margaret Thatcher, because they think that that appeals to the membership, and they think that the membership is still the same, of the same ideology of that almost half a century ago when Margaret Thatcher swept to power. You know, that's what the members clearly, the MPs, clearly believe that the members want. Whether or not that's true, I don't know, given that Boris Johnson won a general election by appealing to constituencies that do not typically, tend to exhibit Thatcherism. And I think that that's then, you've got then a discrepancy between the membership and the general public, as I say, which clearly, as I just pointed out again, aren't particularly keen on either of these two characters. So you've got three different constituencies: MPs, members, and the general public. The general public are the ones that actually matter in the grand scheme of things, and the MPs and the party don't really seem to have clocked that.
Yeah. Well, Benedict and Amy, stay with us, because Ella's in the studio with us still as well, who's been reflecting on this. One of the other interesting aspects, Ella, is the suggestion that the ghost of Boris Johnson will rise again, even on this leadership contest. Now, I don't know technically whether they can do that when the others have been voted off, but clearly there are those within the party thinking we may have made a bit of a mistake here.
Yeah, he's not a ghost because he's defiantly refused to be killed off. He's a very real, living, bombastic figure that could throw a spanner in the works.
Well, he's been a bit quiet in checkers for the last few days, hasn't he?
Well, whether he's up in the air or throwing grenades on, he's having a good time at the moment. But I think, there are more than rumblings and gossip which suggests that he, there's been suggestions that he wishes he could wipe his resignation.
Lord Cruddas.
So I think that's a significant factor. But the thing about the Tory party and the effect that this leadership contest is having is that it has for a very long time been a party in crisis. It's, with rifts, obviously in relation to Brexit in 2016, we saw a lot of that coming to the fore. But in different ways, the inner turmoil of the Tory party has been, an issue for a long time. And what they are currently now doing is airing their dirty laundry in public, which is showing that they cannot coalesce around it. The Telegraph columnist Sherelle Jacobs wrote an excellent piece today, which basically said what the Tory party have revealed in this sort of soap opera of SW1 is that they do not have a vision to coalesce around. They have no ideology. Right. And I think that's going to be their biggest flaw. Yeah.
Let's go back to Amy, because I think Amy's gone. Let's reflect on what we heard from Francis Maud, Lord Maud, talking about this dirty linen. And, of course, he's been through the party when it's really been hammered by the electorate after it was seen as being divided. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there, you really wish that, despite the fact that these two candidates seem really hell-bent on digging up history by kind of affecting sort of some kind of cosplaying of Margaret Thatcher, that they would remember the lessons from history. And even someone like me, who is not a Conservative Party voter, can understand that it's, an unwillingness to understand where they've come from in the past, learn from the mistakes. Even the fact that the two of them at the moment can't admit that they were both, fairly central to some of the decisions that were made in the last few years that have caused part of the economic crisis that we're in at the moment, shows a sort of both a lack of foresight and a lack of an understanding of history. And the key thing that Benedict Spence picked up on, which is that the main people who matter here outside of this process is who votes in a general election. And I just cannot see anyone getting excited. Never mind Keir Starmer, I can't see anyone getting excited about Liz Truss.
Well, let's see if we get excited tonight. Of course, they're both back on telly for the latest chapter then. Ella, for the moment, you're with us until 6. You're with me, Mark Longhurst, in for Colin on Brazier this week on GB News, on TV, online and digital radio, remember. Lots still to come. Don't go anywhere. First, let's take a look at the latest weather.
Hi there. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. After a relatively cloudy day in many places, there'll be an increased chance of clear spells developing overnight, and under those clear skies it will feel cool. Still 1 or 2 showers around as we end the day and go into Wednesday, but on the whole, high pressure is building in from the west, and that means winds are lighter and skies are getting clearer compared with earlier in the week. So actually, the best of the clear spells overnight will be across Western England, central Scotland, parts of Wales. There will be some areas of cloud elsewhere and continued showers for the north of Scotland as well as parts of eastern England. But under clear skies, well, many places will see temperatures dip into the low double figures or even the high single figures. A more comfortable night for sleeping and a fresh start to Wednesday. Plenty of sunshine around first thing, especially for northern and western England, Wales, southern Scotland. Quite quickly the cloud will build and it will tend to fill in, so a rather cloudy afternoon, broken areas of cloud and a few showers. Many places avoiding them though, and 22 to 24 Celsius in the south, 18 to 21 in the north. So feeling pleasant with the lighter winds and where we do get some bright spells, but certainly no return of last week's heat on the horizon. Now into Thursday morning, early hours, we'll see thicker cloud across some central parts of the UK. Areas of rain or showers here. Either side of that, some clear spells, but with a cloudier night on the whole, it's a milder night. Temperatures in some urban areas not tipping below 16 Celsius. Now, the cloud and the showers across North Wales, North Midlands into northern England continues to march north during Thursday morning. Cloud builds elsewhere and further showers will bubble up in places, but there'll also be some sunshine coming through. And Friday sees further showers in the north and the west, likewise on Saturday, but at the same time it will turn warmer.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello there and welcome once more to Brazier with me, Mark Long, here sitting in for Colin all this week. And coming up, live at 5, that feisty TV debate between the two Tory leadership hopefuls last night saw Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss discussing Brexit, China and tax. But things got personal too as they battled it out to become the next Prime Minister. Both MPs not afraid to disagree, despite being in the same party and the same government.
Their mortgage rates are almost 50% higher than mortgage rates in this country because they're borrowing so much.
I'm sorry, this
Canada.
is scaremongering.
Canada actually
this is
has
Project Fear.
Liz, I remember the referendum campaign. I remember the referendum campaign, and there were only one of us who was on the side of Remain and Project Fear, and it was you, not me.
So there. Well, consultant editor at the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, will analyse who's on the front foot in the race for number 10, and we'll be looking ahead to another face-off between the two contenders coming up tonight. More rail chaos on the horizon, I'm afraid. 40,000 members of the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers will walk out tomorrow in the dispute over pay and working conditions. Well, Liz Truss has announced plans to crack down on the unions she says are holding the UK to ransom. We'll have the thoughts of transport expert and CEO of the PC agency, Paul Charles. And could the Great British Chippy be at risk? It's taken a battering. Yes, new figures suggest half of the UK's fish and chip shops could be forced to close after ministers pushed on with imposing tariffs of 35% on seafood imports from Russia. We'll be speaking to a Scottish chip shop owner and director, no less, of the National Federation of Fish Fryers, Stuart Devine. That's coming up before 6. And joining us here in the studio for the next hour, author and journalist Ella Whelan. Ella, as ever, you're very welcome. Thanks for being with us. First, though, let's get the latest news headlines with Bethany.
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon. It's just past 5 o'clock. I'm Bethany Elsey, here to get you up to date on GB News. The International Monetary Fund is predicting the UK is set to have the weakest economy in the G7 next year. They expect Britain's economic growth to expand by just 0.5% due to rampant inflation, which would be the slowest growth among all major economies, except for Russia. It comes as the IMF warned that stalling growth across the world means we could be teetering on the edge of a global recession. The two candidates to become the UK's next Prime Minister will face off again tonight following a heated first head-to-head debate. The pair traded blows over tax, with the Foreign Secretary saying Rishi Sunak would lead the country into recession. But the former Chancellor claimed there was nothing conservative about Miss Truss's approach.
Under my plans, we would start paying down the debt in 3 years' time. So I'm not putting it on the never. I would start paying it down in 3 years.
Liz, that's simply not right. You promised almost £40 billion of unfunded tax cuts, £40 billion more borrowing. That is the country's credit card. It's our children and grandchildren, everyone here's kids, who are going to have to pick up the tab for that.
Labour's Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, watched the debate. He says neither candidate showed the kind of leadership the country needs.
I think the debate we saw last night confirms that these are two political lightweights who supported, defended and enabled Boris Johnson to be the Prime Minister for the last 3.5 or so years. What we need is whoever wins to call a general election to give the British public the choice of a fresh start.
People in England are being urged to use water wisely as the country faces drought in August. The Environment Agency is warning the dry conditions have been exacerbated by record high temperatures and lower than normal rainfall so far this year. Most of England has moved into prolonged dry weather status, and the group is now taking precautionary measures to mitigate the impacts. Network Rail is advising people not to travel by trains tomorrow unless absolutely necessary due to another day of strikes. More than 40,000 members of the RMT union and 14 train operators will walk out in a continued dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. Network Rail says only 20% of services will run, and some places will have no trains at all. To minimise disruption, it's published a special timetable showing many trains will start later and finish earlier. The government doesn't know whether the coronavirus traffic light travel system enforced on those arriving in the UK actually worked. That's the conclusion of the Public Accounts Committee, who say nearly £500 million was spent on the quarantine scheme that caused huge confusion, with 10 rule changes within a year. Arrivals from red list countries had to stay in a quarantine hotel for at least 10 days, but only 2% of those guests actually tested positive. MPs have accused the energy regulator Ofgem of being negligent. The Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy says the government needs to change its out-of-date energy bill support for households. The Select Committee added that a massive insulation drive needs to be launched urgently, as it would permanently bring down bills. Well, energy expert Will Hodson told GB News there are things we can all do to cut our energy costs.
Britain has got the oldest housing stock in Europe, right? And we can take pride, I think, in having built houses that were made to last. But those houses are drafty. They leak energy. And if you can plug those leaks, you're going to save up to £600 from your bill. So the message of yesteryear was switch energy supplier to get the best price. I think the message going forward is look for energy efficiency so as to reduce your energy usage.
And Amazon is increasing the price of its Prime delivery and streaming service due to increased inflation and operating costs. The streaming service says the price will now rise from £7.99 each month to £8.99 from the 15th of September for new customers or on the customer's renewal date. It means the annual membership price will increase from £79 annually to £95. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, let's get back to Brazier.
Bethany, thanks very much indeed. Now, an impassioned, sometimes personal television debate last night saw the two Tory leadership hopefuls battle it out to be our next Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss clashed on economic policy, China and even Brexit. But at times the debate became very heated, the candidates interrupting each other despite being in the same party and having served in the same government. Here's a flavour of some of the key talking points for you.
Under my plans, we would start paying down the debt in 3 years' time. So I'm not putting it on the never, never. I would start paying it down in 3 years.
That's simply not right. You promised almost £40 billion of unfunded tax cuts, £40 billion more borrowing. That is the country's credit card. It's our children and grandchildren, everyone here's kids, who are going to have to pick up the tab for that.
Rishi, that is not true.
There's nothing conservative about doing that.
Under my plans, we would start paying down the debt in 3 years' time. I don't believe this negative, declinist language.
It's your own
that we're
economic
hearing.
advisor, Liz. It's not mine. It's your own advisor.
I have lots of economists that are backing my plans. Everybody thinks that putting up taxes at this moment is going to hurt the economy.
Do you know what mortgage rates are in the US at the moment? Do you want to use them as an example? Their mortgage rates are almost 50% higher than mortgage rates in this country because they're borrowing so much.
I'm sorry, this
Canada.
is scaremongering.
Canada actually
this is Project Fear.
Liz, I remember the referendum campaign. I remember the referendum campaign, and there were only one of us who was on the side of Remain and Project Fear, and it was you, not me.
Okay.
And you talk
maybe
about
I've
this.
learnt from that.
What we do need to do is acknowledge that China is a threat to our national security. It's a threat to our economic security. And that's why, as Chancellor, I was pleased that we could put forward something called the National Security and Investment Bill. We also need to stand up for our values. And for example, when it came to Hong Kong, I was pleased to ensure that we put the funding in place to welcome to this country thousands of fleeing who wanted to leave Hong Kong.
Rishi, I challenged you on this in the debate last week. As recently as a month ago, you were pushing for closer trade relationships with China. This is not something you've advocated in government. I'm delighted that you've come round to my way of thinking.
Well, the two candidates are facing each other again shortly in another head-to-head interview. Rishi Sunak still needing to make ground to win if the latest polls are to be believed. Well, we're joined now by Andrew Pearce, consultant editor at the Daily Mail. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us. I won't ask you what the interest rates are in the US at the moment, which seem to be described as mansplaining by some of the critics.
Do you know, I was surprised the way Rishi Sunak conducted that debate, Mark. And by the way, it's very nice to see you again. because I thought he was aggressive. I think he constantly interrupted Liz Truss. I think he's thin-skinned and tetchy, and it showed. And it's quite interesting. I read Matthew Parris, former colleague of mine when I was on The Times. He's a columnist on The Times, former Tory MP. And he appeared to say to Rishi in his column on Saturday, get out there, go in all guns blazing, because many of the people who vote in this leadership contest will vote in the next week when they get their ballot papers. So throw everything at her straight away. I think he took that advice rather too literally. And I think it backfired, which is why the first poll that we saw yesterday suggested it was 39 to 38 to Rishi. But the poll of Tory party members, again, it gave Liz Truss a pretty big, considerable lead. And so, what he couldn't answer, Mark, was this. If raising taxes, which he's doing now, is so important to getting our economy back on shape, why has no other G7 country done just that?
Yeah, and of course, growth, as Keir Starmer said, is perhaps what we need to get into. But where's this going to leave his strategists for tonight? What's he going to do in his approach for this latest debate?
Well, I suspect he'll be disappointed by that poll finding because, by her own admission, Liz Truss will admit she is not a great and accomplished debater, is she? Let's be honest, she's pretty wooden. Although I think she was better last night. So does he continue to push the aggressive stance? I think he might row back a bit, and I think she'll carry on as she is, trying to be calm, authoritative, trying to rise slightly above the fray. You and I know nothing is worse for people watching on TV or listening to the radio than hearing two people talking over each other. It's a complete turn-off, and I suspect some people turned for the button, and they wouldn't have been blaming her for that. They'd have been blaming him.
And, when we talk about turn-offs, of course, they're trying to put the red meat out there for the Tory party faithful, but they're going to have to be Prime Minister and perhaps face a general election within 18 months or even shorter. And the voters hate divided parties and this sort of squabbling that goes on.
Yeah, and it's too personal. I really thought, I expected it when there was 5 people. They were all throwing, knocking spots off each other. But when it came down to the head-for-head for 2 people, I thought it would be a bit more civilised, a bit more cerebral, a bit more thoughtful, a bit politer. I was surprised it was such a slanging match. And it is a turn-off for the voters. The Labour Party will be benefiting from this because you've got Liz Truss effectively shredding Sunak's entire economic policy of the last couple of years. And, of course, if he wins, it's being undermined by one of the most senior members of the government. And also, let's be honest, Mark, whoever wins, and I think it will be Truss, will want the other one in their cabinet. Although I don't think Sunak's got a chance of being Chancellor. And if she loses, I think he'll move her out of the Foreign Secretary's job too. But they've got to get on. And I'm told privately, normally they do get on, but you wouldn't believe it from what you saw last night.
Yeah. Another thought, Andrew, with all these noises off about Boris Johnson, suggestions, Lord Cruddas, that, he wants to get back in the fight. I mean, that's not realistic, is it?
Look, I'm a great fan of Boris, and I'm sad the way this has happened, because I think he's one of the best they had. He's the master of his own misfortune, Mark. He made mistakes, stupid mistakes. Should have told the truth more about parties. He should have had better people around him. But this is just nostalgia, sentimental. He's not coming back anytime soon. Lord Cruddas is saying very enigmatically, wait till next week, there's going to be a really big announcement. Boris Johnson is not going to be our next Prime Minister. It's going to be Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss. And I've got my money on Liz Truss, not Boris, much as I like him. Why don't they make him an envoy to Ukraine? That would be a really good job for him, wouldn't it?
Yeah, or perhaps Defence Secretary, because he seems to be throwing the grenades about quite successfully. Anyway, on that note, thank you as ever for joining us, and great to speak to you again and see you, and more, of course, in the days to come. We're also joined now in the studio by the political editor of The Express Online, David Maddox. David, thanks for joining us, and you were listening in there to what Andrew had to say. Where does The Express stand on this? I mean, have you got Liz Truss way ahead as well?
In terms of, we're not supporting either candidate. We are a platform, of course, for... I suspect our readers may lean towards Liz Truss, so let's be frank about it. But, yes, we've got Liz Truss ahead in terms of Conservative voters and probably Conservative members as well. And we have to remember that the electorate these two are appealing to are Conservative members. It's not the wider country yet.
And what are they saying to you about the way this has been conducted so far? And do they share the view of Keir Starmer that they've been knocking lumps out of each other?
I can tell you throughout the debate last night, I was having messages literally every other minute from alarmed Conservative MPs who were absolutely horrified by what they were seeing.
So sharing Lord Maud's fears.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
And they thought it was worse than the ITV debate, which was so bad that a delegation went to both Sunak and Truss asking them not to do another debate. Because
this is interesting.
Yeah,
so how was that engineered then?
Well, if you remember, the Sky debate afterwards got cancelled.
Yes.
And that was because Sunak and Truss pulled out of it. And that's because they'd been lobbied by Conservative MPs not to repeat what they'd done on ITV.
Because we've got this other interesting fact that we've got Rishi Sunak speaking to Andrew Neil on Channel 4, we understand, on Friday.
Yeah.
But the understanding is that Liz Truss is still saying no.
Yes, and of course this is one-to-ones.
And perhaps pretty forensic as well.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah.
And there's a long-standing issue with Andrew Neil, not with Andrew Neil himself, who's a great journalist.
Well, remember the empty chair for Boris Johnson.
Indeed, and is that top politicians are avoiding him, and even before all this blew up, he couldn't invite the two front benches onto his... Well, he wanted to invite them, but neither of the front benches, Labour or Conservative, would appear on his show because they're afraid of him.
Now, we've got the Lionesses playing the semi-final tonight, so I have to ask you, Ella, are you going to be watching this other match going on, or is the footy going to win, which is going to be more entertaining?
I suspect the football match. I think most people will be tuning into the Lionesses, not just because it's a great sporting event,
yeah, absolutely,
but also because it just feels like the same thing day after day at the moment. I know that tax is important. I hear the arguments from people that this is sort of central to Tory policy. But I'm gonna scream or go blind if I hear another row of basically over a timing issue, which is essentially the only difference between the two of them. There is no big big picture thinking. It's basically, are you going to cut taxes now or later? Are you going to tinker now or later?
Yeah.
And I think that does that resonate? I'm not a Tory member. Does that resonate with Tory members? I can't imagine it does.
And David, I mean, are either team going to be brave enough to do that and really do something completely different tonight?
I would be surprised if they are. I think if anybody's advising Rishi Sunak, they should tell him to calm down a little, because he easily won the first debate when he was calm and looked prime ministerial. He needs to go back to that, and actually he might stand a chance of coming out on top.
Right, calm down, dear, as we remember. Thank you both for the moment, and of course we'll see how they treat that tonight, and more reflection perhaps tomorrow on who won or score draw, who knows. Well, also speaking about tomorrow, widespread disruption on Britain's railways once again. Around 40,000 members of the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers walking out in their dispute over pay and working conditions. Now, Network Rail is warning only 20% of services expected to be running. Some places will have no trains at all, they say, with passengers being urged not to travel unless essential. But Conservative leadership contender, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, pledging to take a tough stance on the unions if she becomes Prime Minister. Now, she's promised within the first 30 days in office to stop union leaders from holding, as she says, the UK to ransom with militant action. But the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, attempting to move further away from Jeremy Corbyn's legacy, he's ditched his predecessor's plans for a mass nationalisation of industries, including the rail companies. And within the last half hour, we have to tell you, the RMT has announced that London Underground workers will be going on strike once again on the 19th of August in their row over jobs unpensioned. Well, let's get the views now of Paul Charles, CEO of the PC agency. Paul, yet more misery, it seems, coming down the tube tunnel for the travellers. And all this is happening, of course, in this political vacuum. So it doesn't seem that any of these disputes are going to be solved soon.
Yes, Mark, you're right. I'm afraid we're seeing a complete vacuum in terms of leadership over transport infrastructure across the UK at the moment, whether it's our air, rail or seaports, as well as roads, of course. There's a distinct feeling that there is no real leadership in place at the moment during this period, whilst the Conservatives are electing a new leader and therefore a new Prime Minister. So the unions are flexing their muscles on a continuous basis. They started it a few weeks ago, of course, and now what they're saying is, well, there's no leadership, there's no one really helping us to resolve this issue. We're going to set more dates and put more pressure. And of course, Liz Truss particularly is playing to the Conservative membership by saying we're going to clamp down on the unions. But we've heard that before, of course, from previous Conservative leaders.
Yeah, and one wonders about the tactics here. Surely if people are going to ignore politically the strikes going on at the moment, they're really sort of wasting their time here. Why not wait until the new government is in place and then go for a raft of industrial action?
Well, it's convenient for the unions at the moment to keep the momentum up during the summer period when there are lots of tourists coming back to the UK, when many people in the UK are not travelling abroad, they're staying here for staycations, certainly using London a lot more. So they feel as though their tactics are working during a period when there are more leisure travellers and fewer business travellers. And of course, one of the accusations they faced during the last major national rail strike was that they had little impact because so many people work at home now and are hybrid working and therefore not using the trains as much. So the unions know that if they can maximise their walkouts during the summer, they're going to have more impact on consumer opinion. And that's why they're setting dates for August and flexing their muscles pretty well at the moment.
And well, let's reflect on that. I mean, this may actually persuade yet more people, in the private sector trying to get to work without a union representing them. Well, I'm going to stay at home. I'm not going to go on the trains and put my fares through the system.
Yes, I mean, it's not just rail, of course, such as the national strike tomorrow, but it's also pilots at British Airways who are threatening another ballot on strike action. We are, of course, seeing other sectors where they're threatening strikes. And we've seen a great conclusion in the BA check-in workers strike, where the unions were delighted to have effectively got a 13% pay increase for some of their workers. And that's something the government doesn't want to know about, because 13% in an inflation period of roughly 9% is way too high for the government to consider during this rail strike period. They want to be settling at more like 6 or 7%. So because the unions in the aviation industry have had that success with 13%, they're now thinking, well, on the trains, we could perhaps get something similar. Yeah. So this really puts pressure on government at the moment, with its lack of leadership, to come to some sort of arrangement before the new leader takes over amid a period of greater strike action.
Paul, as ever, thank you very much indeed for your expert opinion on that. And of course, we'll see who else decides to go on strike in the coming weeks. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, could football be coming home once again? Yes. We've got England's women facing Sweden in the semi-final of the Women's Euros tonight at Bramall Lane in Sheffield. The Lionesses boss, Serena Wiegman, suggesting her players are looking to inspire the nation and make fans proud once again. Well, indeed, a win tonight could see England heading to Wembley in 5 days' time for the final of the competition, which could be against Germany. Think on that. Well, joining us now, our reporter Ellie Costello, who's in a fan zone in London's Trafalgar Square. That's great to see the reaction there. I mean, we've got 32,000 people expected in Sheffield, but quite a few thousand maybe there in London as well.
Yes, absolutely. The excitement is building here in Trafalgar Square in London. This is a fan zone which is set to open at 6 p.m. But look already at the queues that are turning out to see the Lionesses face Sweden. Lots of England shirts that we can see. People are very excited to be here. Give us all a wave. Yes, really excited people here. Fantastic to seeing the Lionesses doing so well. So many people hoping that we see a victory again tonight in Sheffield. We may be 200 miles away, but it is going to be a party here tonight. Let me show you this massive fan zone behind us. Preparations are being made. You can see the huge amount of security inside. The barriers are being put up and tables as well. 5,000 people we could see arrive to watch the match on the big screen at 8 p.m. tonight. Well, earlier on, I was inside the fan zone and I spoke to people about what they were most looking forward to. We've got this big game tonight, Lionesses versus Sweden. Do we think the Lionesses can do this?
Absolutely, yes.
What makes you so confident?
Because they're playing wonderfully all along. So
Go girls.
Of course, it's going to be an absolute landslide. There's no doubt about it. England are going to win. So, yeah, absolutely, we're supporting the girls. Because I think we had a really tough game against Spain. I think the previous games were super easy. And we showed our strength coming from 1-0 behind, and then we were 2-1. So it was the most fantastic game. I was edge of my seat. So, yeah, definitely, no doubt about it. Yeah, we can definitely beat them.
Ellie, it's great to see there's quite a few kids there, and there's definitely a buzz about this, a feel-good factor, isn't there?
There absolutely is. People are so excited, and children, especially little girls especially, are so inspired by what they're seeing on the screens every night. And one person that is really inspiring people is Serena Wigman, the head coach. Now, she is a name that we have all got to know the last few weeks and months, and she is known, as well as her fantastic coaching, the last 18 matches the Lionesses have won under her, but she's also known for her navy blue suit from the British high street brand Marks & Spencer's. Now, it's retailing for £80, but since this tournament has taken place, that suit worn by Serena Wigman every single match, those sales have rocketed by 140%. So it's very similar to what we saw with Gareth Southgate's waistcoat in the 2018 World Cup. Obviously, he's the manager for the men's football team, so it really is fantastic to see women's football on the same sort of stage and to see the same sort of publicity and excitement that often surrounds the men's football game, now surrounding women's football. And I think you can just see in the excitement in the people's faces in these crowds tonight, especially of the little children. This is so inspiring for them to see women doing well on the international football stage.
Lovely. Ellie, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Let's reflect if you want to watch in style tonight. As we were saying, it is a Marks & Spencer's outfit. The Telegraph telling us a relaxed single-breasted blazer, £45, navy slim-fit trousers, £22.50. And there we are. That's what you look like if you want to ape the touchline look. Let's bring Ella in. I'm not quite sure it's that flattering, is it?
Well, you know, certain kind of power dressing definitely works off pitch and on pitch. And you know,
and we saw it happen with Gareth Southgate with the blazer and the waistcoat, rather.
Indeed, if Gareth can do it, the Marina can as well. I think there's, you know, one of the things about these huge football tournaments is that even someone like me who really doesn't know very much about sport and really isn't generally that enthused about football gets caught up in the kind of national sentiment. And I think there is something, you know, the English do it very, very well. You know, we come together at times like this and kind of.
And boy, do we need it at the moment with all the doom and gloom. I mean, it's quite a positive thing. And can you imagine if Germany win tomorrow and we're meeting Germany in the final at Wembley? Wow.
Yeah, and there's a lot of sort of joking that happens around. We're good-humoured about this kind of thing. And you know, we saw in previous tournaments, particularly ones that came after the pandemic, that what it meant for the nation to come together in moments like this. And I think if women's football can do it as well as men's football, then that's definitely something to be celebrated. 3 lionesses on the shirt, indeed. For the moment, thank you for your views. With us for the next half hour, and you're with me too, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin all this week. And this is GB News on TV, online and digital radio. Coming up, a report by MPs warning that Ofgem has been negligent, incompetent indeed, in its regulation of our energy supply over the past decade. It's resulted in higher household bills and cost us, the taxpayer, billions of pounds. Well, the former CEO of Energy UK, Angela Knight, with us to give her thoughts on the report. Coming up next, we'll be back in a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello, good evening. It's 31 minutes past 5. I'm Bethany Elsey, here to get you up to date from the GB Newsroom. The International Monetary Fund is predicting the UK is set to have the weakest economy in the G7 next year. They expect Britain's economic growth to expand by just 0.5% due to rampant inflation, which would be the slowest growth among all major economies except for Russia. It comes as the IMF warned that stalling growth across the world means we could be teetering on the edge of a global recession. The two candidates to become the UK's next Prime Minister will face off again tonight following a heated first head-to-head debate. The pair traded blows over tax, with the Foreign Secretary saying Rishi Sunak would lead the country into recession. But the former Chancellor claimed there was nothing conservative about Miss Truss's approach. People in England are being urged to use water wisely as the country faces drought in August. The Environment Agency is warning the dry conditions have been exacerbated by record high temperatures. Most of England has moved into prolonged dry weather status and is implementing precautionary measures to mitigate the impacts. Network Rail is advising people not to travel by train tomorrow unless absolutely necessary due to another day of strikes. More than 40,000 members of the RMT union and 14 train operators will walk out, leaving just 20% of services running. And London Underground workers are also staging another strike on the 19th of August in a long-running dispute over jobs and pensions. Foreign Secretary and Tory leadership candidate Liz Truss says she doesn't support the action.
I would legislate to make sure there are essential services on our railway. It is completely wrong that the travelling public are being held ransom by militant unions. We can't allow that to happen. We need to make sure our essential services run.
On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. We'll get back to Brazier in just a moment.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
But first, here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.203 to the dollar and 1.19 to the euro. The price of gold currently stands at £1,426.79 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Bethany, thanks very much for that. You're watching Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin all this week. And you're watching and listening to GB News, of course, on TV, online and digital radio. Now, MPs say that the energy regulator Ofgem has been negligent, incompetent, indeed, in overseeing the energy supply market over the past decade. Now, this report by the Commons Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee, no less, says failures have cost us, the taxpayer, billions and led to higher bills for the energy bill payers, equivalent to £94 each household. The report also suggesting Ofgem has allowed energy suppliers with glaringly inadequate financial arrangements and high-risk business models to enter the market and then failed to enforce their own rules, ignoring repeated warnings about poorly run companies. We're joined in the studio by Angela Knight, former CEO of Energy UK, the trade association for the industry. Thanks for coming in, Angela. Ouch. They couldn't have got more wrong, could they?
It's pretty blunt stuff, that. Yeah. And I think that many of us would agree, actually, with what has been said about Ofgem, because it's been a long-held concern that people could just come in as suppliers. They didn't have to have a proper business plan. They didn't have to be properly capitalised. They could say they're going to sign contracts to supply you and me and anybody else at a price, but they hadn't forward bought on the market. They hadn't hedged on the market. And so the market price goes up. They're committed to supply at a lower price. They go bust. And the rest of us are all left holding that baby.
And pick up the bill.
Absolutely.
Was it done with the best intentions, that competition was seen as good? It would drive down prices. You could go onto YouSwitch and all these other websites and actually, get a much better deal for yourself.
That is what you have to say in favour of Ofgem, because Ofgem was under huge pressure to get more suppliers in, simply because the view was, and to a certain extent correctly, that the big suppliers were holding the market to ransom.
Bit of a cartel.
Yeah. Now, they weren't, but it's also true to say that they didn't necessarily handle their customers as well as they should, and, they were slack on the pricing and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That is correct. But the mantra was, get in more suppliers and it'll all be a better deal. Well, yes, competition is a good thing, but you have to put it in the right sort of framework. And that was where the failures occurred.
Right.
The framework was not there.
OK, so no defence then that the energy supply increase, that the price increase caught them unawares, that, the geopolitical situation with Ukraine and so on.
Well, yes, of course
you couldn't have foreseen.
I mean, nobody could have foreseen exactly what was going to happen with Russia or Ukraine, and not just in this area, but in lots of other areas.
Yeah.
What you do have to do, though, if you are a regulator, just as you do as if you're in business, is you have to say, right, these are the circumstances today.
Yep.
What are the worst things that could happen? And if the worst things could happen, am I able to deal with it?
Right.
And that is one of those forward plannings, which didn't...
So, given that, let's ask this very important question. How robust are they going to be in dealing with this coming autumn and winter, given the warnings that we've got and the fact that we're learning today Gazprom has started to reduce the gas supplies to Europe, which supplies their electricity supply?
Exactly. And, of course, there's a big chunk of our electricity supply which comes from gas as well. Now, the autumn, there's a few players have got to do their piece for the autumn. You're correct. Ofgem is one. And if you look at that report, all the recommendations also have report to committee, report to BEIS, report in the public domain. And if you're Ofgem, boy, are you going to do that. So I do think that Ofgem are going to play their part this autumn. But what you've also got to have in there is some of the work which the business department has been doing in that report that it put out 10 days ago, its white paper, because right now the calculation which says this is what happens this is how the wholesale price of electricity is worked out, is all skewed by the price of gas.
Right.
So the current way in which they do that average needs to be revisited. If they do that, it should bring down the price of the wholesale market of electricity. Not only is that good for us domestic consumers, but importantly for business who are big users of electricity.
Yeah, absolutely.
The cost to them feeds through to us in the goods and services and, of course, in employment. So we need to get a grip of the technicalities, and a lot of that sits with the department, as well as getting a grip on the regulation, which sits with Ofgem.
A lot to do, right.
The winter's going to be tricky.
Yeah, and Ella, let's actually reflect that Rishi Sunak was saying in that debate last night that he can't really set what government help will be there until he knows what this price cap and where the market's going to be for the autumn coming.
Yeah, I think Angela makes a really key point, which is that there's, you can argue that the crisis in Russia and Ukraine took people by surprise. I mean, there are other people who will say, well, no, we knew that something like this was coming. But the key point is having a contingency plan and understanding that this is not something that's happening in the space of a few months and then is going to go away, but it's a new reality for us dealing with this new geopolitical context and how it affects the very fundamentals from where we get our food from and our energy. So having some more of that kind of political insight would be definitely worthwhile.
Heat and eat, as they say.
And if you're Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss or whoever it may be, what you have to do now is say, we will keep this under constant review, because you really do not know what's going to happen. And Gazprom squeezing Europe, although that's not a direct effect on us, it will indirectly impact as well. Under review is a key issue for how people are going to be helped this autumn.
Angela, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's just reflect very quickly. Ofgem have issued a statement to say this: while the unprecedented rise in global gas prices would have resulted in market exits under almost any regulatory system, we have been clear and transparent about the fact that suppliers and Ofgem's previous financial resilience regime were not robust enough. End of quote. Coming up in the debate this hour, we'll be asking, should overweight people be banned from joining our armed forces? Indeed, the British Army fitness instructor saying that body positivity movement, whatever that is, could jeopardise standards in the armed forces. First, so let's bring you up to date with the latest news headlines.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin. Now it's time for the debate this hour with a British Army fitness instructor criticising the body positivity movement for promoting obesity and jeopardising standards in the forces. Lance Sergeant Farron Morgan saying many young people are shocked at the fitness requirements in the Army due to the body positivity adverts that they see on television. He's also warned that having overweight troops could negatively affect the Army's operational effectiveness. So we're asking, should overweight people be banned from joining our armed forces? We're joined by the former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, Chip Chapman, and Angelica Malin, who's editor-in-chief of About Time magazine. Thank you both very much for joining us. Let's just reflect first about what we define as overweight, Chip. I mean, is this the body mass index that they are maybe slightly above the figures that should be ideal?
Well, I think we did away with the body mass index some years ago. And of course, as an initial input test, initial fitness assessment to get into the Army, and an output test when you leave phase 1 and phase 2 training. But of course, it's true that at the tip of the spear, if you're, I don't know, Airborne Forces, Parachute Regiment like me, or Special Forces, and you're at the front line where you have to go beyond human endurance, you need to be both physically and mentally fit. But of course, nowadays there is a shaft to that spear, because we now talk about 5 domains of war, land, sea, air, cyber, and space. And certainly last week, Air Chief Marshal Sir Michael Wigston, the head of the RAF, did say that maybe fitness doesn't matter in some of those other domains, the cyber and space, when, for example, you might want to alter the profile of electronic warfare systems from range, and that you need geeks, young geeks, and where fitness may not be as relevant as it is to those that you're showing at the moment sitting in a wood on the front line. To be honest.
Can I just ask you, do you necessarily have to be thin and lithe to be fit?
No, you don't. Of course you don't. And that's where the body mass index is absolutely wrong, because you have such things as, people weight training and having the cognitive skills they need. For example, if you're an artilleryman humping around 155 ammunition, having upper body strength and a good body mass index would actually be helpful to you.
Well, let's bring in Angelica, because I know when the airline industries tried to put these sort of limits on weight and things for cabin staff, there was quite an uproar. I mean, should we actually adopt a different approach for the armed services?
Well, I find these comments just rather inflammatory and unnecessary, and I think there's some confusion here about what body positivity means, and it isn't promoting being fat. It's about acceptance and encouraging bodies of all types and assessing beauty standards and looking at the representation in the media. So to just use body positivity as this negative thing to say it's encouraging people to be fat is wrong. So I find these comments really inflammatory and just quite unkind to people. And I think these kind of comments put people off considering a career in the armed forces to start with.
Yeah, excuse my ignorance, but what does body positivity actually mean?
Well, it's about body acceptance, and it's about challenging beauty standards, that there isn't one ideal body type, there isn't one way to look good, but it's also about a feeling. It's about feeling good in the skin you're in, and that's been the shift in the last few years, is we're wanting to see different body types on the screen and in the press to show that it's not just about being a size 0 or a size 10, but it's about feeling good in your own skin. So it's not about encouraging people to be overweight, which is where I think these comments are wrong.
OK, but Chip, obviously, for those coming into the services, there may be dietary problems for many who've come from perhaps, working class backgrounds where they can't afford good grub and so on. But I guess, if you're a para, you might need a slightly bigger parachute if you're a bit too big for it.
Well, there is an all-up weight of a parachute, actually. So the larger you are, the less weight you can carry into combat. But the thing here, of course, is that being fit and healthy costs the armed forces and society nothing. Being really unfit and obese costs the NHS £6.1 billion a year. So there is a cost to being obese for society, and we'd rather not have obese people probably in the armed forces. But as I said, there is this sort of shaft of the spear where there are skill sets which people may not be accepted into the armed forces, which we might need from those who are overweight. So you don't necessarily want to exclude people from the workforce for being overweight, but they are probably not the people you want at the tip of the spear in the van of battle, as Field Marshal Montgomery called it, for example, about airborne forces in the Second World War, and since, which we saw in the reflections on the 40th anniversary of the Falklands.
Yeah. Angelica, I mean, should we perhaps just approach it with a bit of common sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to bring in the other side of those obesity numbers, on the other side, inpatient hospital admissions for eating disorders such as anorexia and bulimia have increased by 84% in the last 5 years, mainly with children and young people, and a huge increase with men as well. So that's another side that people don't perhaps think about as much when they're making these insensitive comments about people's weight or being fatophobic. It also creates a huge amount of anxiety, and lots of young people, with the rise of social media and being able to see everyone else's food and diet and lifestyle, lots of young people are struggling with body issues as well.
Yes, this body image problem. Well, thank you both very much indeed for bringing us your expert views on that. And, of course, we'll be reflecting on what the British Army says about it in due course. Thanks for the moment, but still with us in the studio this afternoon, Ella. body image is difficult enough, but I guess when you're talking about, frontline troops and defence of the realm, it takes on a special significance. It's
obvious to anyone, surely, that if you're going to join the army, you're going to have to be able to jump high and run fast, and you can't do that.
Well, even cyber warfare, if you're, with a laptop?
Well, sure, maybe. I mean, if you're going to be sat in front of a computer all day, then maybe. But I would have no problem with, officials in the army saying you've got to have a certain level of fitness. In the same way that I think I'd have no problem that if you were, a hod carrier on a construction site, you'd have to be able to, pick up some bricks. But the thing about the body positivity discussion is that, it's not just about, about saying love the skin you're in. In actual fact, the politics of the body positivity movement has been quite censorious over the last few years. I remember covering certain protests against weight loss adverts that were being put up on London tube stations, and people who claimed they were part of the body positivity movement said, this isn't just about saying, oh, I love myself. It's actually about saying that the world has to change to fit what people, how people see themselves. I think what we should really be telling people is to stop being, particularly young people with the rise of eating disorders and things like that, is to stop being so obsessed with how you look. It is the least interesting thing about you, unless you want to become a supermodel. There are more interesting things in life than looking at yourself in the mirror.
You are who you are.
And I am saying that from someone who's fairly large at the moment, so maybe I would.
Yeah, but for other reasons, maybe.
But I think you use the term common sense. Some common sense here.
OK. Well, perhaps not the best timing now to talk about fish and chips. Because half of the UK's fish and chip shops could be forced to close after ministers pushed on with imposing some tariffs of 35%, would you believe, on seafood imports from Russia. Now, for the consumer, it means the average price of fish and chip supper could rise from £8.50 to £11.50, with shops struggling against rising costs, not just on the fish, but cooking oil and things as well. Well, Stuart Devine, Scottish Director of the National Federation of Fish Fryers, joins us now. Stuart, thanks very much indeed for your time. £11.50, that's getting a bit steep, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely getting expensive. We're trying to hold the price as best we can, but as the product gets dearer and dearer, it's becoming more and more difficult. So we really do have a great problem on our hands.
How do you get out of the problem? I went to one chippy and they offered brill as an alternative to cod or haddock, and I'm afraid it wasn't that brill.
Yeah, well, we are doing these things. We are looking at alternative products, but you find that Britain is a very proud place where predominantly Scotland tends to be predominantly haddock, and cod is a big seller in England. So trying to encourage your customers to move on to a different product, it's never going to be easy. So that's one of the other problems that we face on a day-to-day basis.
I don't know whether I should ask you about deep-fried Mars bars as an alternative, because obviously it doesn't go down too well in Scotland with some people, does it?
The deep fried Mars bars is quite famous in certain places, so that's for a different story. But I don't think there's a shortage of deep Mars bars on the go yet,
Is this going to be a short-term problem, much like fuel, oil supplies and so on, or are we facing now the fact that a chip supper, fish and chip supper, is not going to be a cheap option anymore?
We've had a very difficult time. We've came through COVID. We were hit hard by COVID. We then went through Brexit, which has had an impact on us. Now, of course, we've got the war in Ukraine, and although we fully support the government's actions, we are crying out to government now for help. I obviously speak on behalf of the fish and chip fryers, but the hospitality industry as a whole is taking some baton, and right now it's time for the government to need to step up and help us. And that's what we need in order to survive. Otherwise, we are going to have mass casualties, and that's the last thing you want, which will lead to job losses, etc. At a time where we're trying to get the Britain back on its feet, I just think this industry has been so important, needs help, and that's what we're crying out for help right now.
And many chip shops, of course, long established. Stuart, thank you very much indeed for joining us and bringing us all the latest on the problems facing the industry. Federation of Fish Fryers, thanks. Coming up next, we've got Dubes and Co. And let's get the views first of Ella, because clearly this is across the industry. And as Stuart was reflecting there, many family businesses in many towns across the country have been there for many years and indicating, they don't know whether they can keep going on this basis.
It's a bit like pubs, the cultural significance of the fish and chip shop. I can think of so many novels and films and things like that have central.
What was that song? I met Elvis down the chip shop. I seem to remember. Yes.
Yeah. So they play fundamental role. I mean, you can overstate it, but I think they have fundamental roles in the communities. It's where most my in-laws have forever gone and got fish and chips on a Friday. And I think that the important point that Stuart was making was that yes, there have been some short-term issues in relation to the pandemic or what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. But there are also longer questions, and I never agree with Jamie Oliver, ever, politically. But I did watch however, one great programme he did do was about looking at the various other forms of species of, or whatever you call them, of fish, other than cod and haddock. That can be, I know you said the brill wasn't
Don't go for the brill.
But I think, broadening our horizons and stuff like that, if it means these institutions stay open, is an option that's worth considering.
Yeah, rock salmon, which is otherwise known as dogfish. So there we go. Thank you for that. Let's reflect that Dubes & Co. is coming up with Michelle shortly here in the studio. What have you got for us, Michelle?
Hello, Mark. Yes, going to get into politics. Did you see the leadership debate last night, viewers? It was like a bad episode of The Apprentice, wasn't it? Are these TV debates doing more harm than good? What's the alternative, by the way, to the Tories? Of course, Labour have been outlining their economic plans. Is that the future Labour government? We'll be looking at all of that. Also, as well, some people might be old enough to remember all the protests around what became the poll tax. There's a new campaign now that's basically asking people to stop paying their energy bills when it goes up in October. So I'm asking, is it ever really a good idea to refuse to pay your bills? And national service, lots of problems in our society at the moment, Mark. Many people think that national service is the answer. Is it? I'll have that and more.
Lovely. Michelle, see you shortly. Thanks for that. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for being with us. Just to remind you, I'm Mark Long here, sitting in for Colin all this week, but thanks for being with us. Thanks to Ella, too, for being with us and joining us in the studio. Next up, though, Dubes & Co. First, let's get the latest weather.
Hi there. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. After a relatively cloudy day in many places, there'll be an increased chance of clear spells developing overnight, and under those clear skies it will feel cool. Still 1 or 2 showers around as we end the day and go into Wednesday, but on the whole, high pressure is building in from the west, and that means winds are lighter and skies are getting clearer compared with earlier in the week. So actually, the best of the clear spells overnight will be across Western England, central Scotland, parts of Wales. There will be some areas of cloud elsewhere and continued showers for the north of Scotland as well as parts of eastern England. But under clear skies, well, many places will see temperatures dip into the low double figures or even the high single figures. A more comfortable night for sleeping and a fresh start to Wednesday. Plenty of sunshine around first thing, especially for northern and western England, Wales, southern Scotland. Quite quickly the cloud will build and it will tend to fill in, so a rather cloudy afternoon, broken areas of cloud and a few showers. Many places avoiding them though, and 22 to 24 Celsius in the south, 18 to 21 in the north. So feeling pleasant with the lighter winds and where we do get some bright spells, but certainly no return of last week's heat on the horizon. Now into Thursday morning, early hours, we'll see thicker cloud across some central parts of the UK. Areas of rain or showers here. Either side of that, some clear spells, but with a cloudier night on the whole, it's a milder night. Temperatures in some urban areas not tipping below 16 Celsius. Now the cloud and the showers across North Wales, North Midlands into northern England continues to march north during Thursday morning. Cloud builds elsewhere and further showers will bubble up in places, but there'll also be some sunshine coming through. And Friday sees further showers in the north and the west, likewise on Saturday, but at the same time it will turn warmer.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring